Hi everyone, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur. I hope that you're doing well. I want to continue the library tour, our shelf safari for real now that it's summer, by getting one of the shelves that's out in the common room as we pack up books. These are all NYRB Classics fiction. I previously did an NYRB Classics nonfiction video some months back. I'll link that in the description box. As with the other library tour videos, if I've done a video on any of these, I'll link that in the description box as well. But we're going to lead off with one of the great modernist novelists, and that's Henry Green with Party Going from 1939. Green's an interesting writer in part because it feels like in every novel he's trying to find some new way to be unconventional, to explore what the novel can be, what it should be. Sometimes it's with dialogue, sometimes it's with an emphasis on like the recreating the vernacular of a community. Party Going is this almost claustrophobic book set in its present time there in the late 1930s. We have a group of people who are sort of heading from their houses and such off together for a gathering, and traffic is stopped. And so we have characters who are stuck there in the train station. Some of them want to head back to a hotel. Some of them are arriving late to the train station. They lose track of each other. It's a very disorienting book. It's very short. But Green expects his readers to work. He doesn't connect the dots for you. And so it's a book that can be a little bit challenging. And the disorienting effect as a reader, I think, mirrors the disorienting, experience that the characters within the novel are having. The speaker is often not named. We have to be able to, think back and think through, who is this speaker? What else has this speaker said across this novel? How is this development occurring? And so if that interests you, it's sort of a choose your own adventure. You can read this and be like, this sucks. Or you can read and be like, this is really interesting and challenging and cool. So I enjoyed it quite a bit. I'll follow that up with Loving somewhat later. And this one it's all set out at sort of this countryside manor, this estate, Anglo-Irish estate. And we have the butlers dying. There are, characters who are off at war, other characters who are having affairs while someone's off at war, or are considering having affairs. There are happy relationships. There are jealous or disappointed relationships that exist across. This is one that does rely quite a bit on dialogue, and it reminded me a little bit of the way Jane Austen used dialogue, where the dialogue is what conveys so much of the character. I really enjoyed it. I think this was one of the earliest videos I did on this channel, so I'll link that in the description box below. And then another British novel from the 1930s, we have Rogue Male by Geoffrey Household. Here we have a sporting gentleman who has been captured in Central Europe in a totalitarian regime, and he's tortured because he was caught looking through the telescope of his rifle at the dictator of that totalitarian regime. It's never quite clear which 30s regime it is, but it becomes more clear in a later sequel that Household wrote. But this gentleman escapes. He escapes back to England, where, having escaped, he's now pursued by the spy service, and he ends up basically camping and then ultimately creating a little burrow, a foxhole for himself that he's hiding in as his pursuers close in. And can he escape? Can he turn the tables on them? This is a very tense book. It is thrilling, and it's incredibly written. It's a very passionate, angry book. Justifiably, with the dictator who this character is pointing his rifle at, and I couldn't believe how deeply I became immersed in this novel. So I highly recommend this. The cover also is just perfect dynamite. Another one that I've done a video on would be Red Shift by Alan Gardner. This is latter half of the 20th century. And here we have sort of an exploration of deep topography, psychogeography. We have three separate narratives going on. One is set in sort of like Roman Britain. One is set during the English Civil War. And then one is set in like the 1960s, maybe early 1970s. And in each of them, there are these, they're all set on the sort of the same locale. Each has this deep sense of frustration, danger, pursuit that's going on. There's it's an axe head, I believe, that is sort of connecting the different timelines along with the locale. It's really strange, but it's really interesting and thoroughly enjoyable. So I recommend that as well. One of the most beautiful books, one that I think is kind of continuing to make the rounds on BookTube, Bookstagram, wherever, is A Month in the Country by J.L. Carr. This, while being a very short book, is just one of those crystalline novels that Every sentence seems to be perfectly like crafted and placed and just lined perfectly. Here we have a character who's a veteran who's returned from war, and his job is to restore this ancient painting in a church up like on towards the top of the church. And so as he's uncovering and helping restore the painting, we get his interactions with another character who is a veteran from war, and who they're both sort of isolated and alone. We have interactions with other characters sort of in the town around this small old church, but it's really just a single person trying to uncover this painting. And as he does, he starts to uncover and learn more about the painter, like just from the technique. The descriptions that Carr provides are really quietly beautiful. So I think I've yet to hear of somebody who was disappointed by this book. I really enjoyed it myself. And then the Chrysalids from John Wyndham, a post-apocalyptic, really strange and uncomfortable book. The strange colors on this cover certainly capture what's going on. Here we have one where we have, there, as with post-apocalyptic works, there's like, sort of religious communities, there are outsiders, there are genetic abnormalities, and all of that comes into play. Now, there are times where it's very playful, but there are other times where it feels very serious, and makes you think, makes you question what's going on. So this is one, again, that I don't know of anybody who's been disappointed by it, certainly. Moving over, we have Randall Jarrell's Book of Stories. Randall Jarrell had also written essays on poetry. Here he has a great introduction, just sort of exploring the idea of a story. And then he collected a series of short stories, narrative poems, the Book of Jonah from the Hebrew Bible, all sorts of works that are in here. Some real highlights, multiple stories from Kafka, The Nose from Gogol, Her Table Spread by Elizabeth Bowen, Bertolt Brecht's Concerning the Infanticide, Marie Farrar, The Three Hermits from Tolstoy, Hans Christian Andersen's Fir Tree, Catherine Ann Porter's He. There's an anonymous fairy tale, The Red King and the Witch, which might be my single favorite work that's in here. Second place would be Biège Prairie, or Biège Lee, from Ivan Turgenev's Sketches from a Hunter's Notebook. E.M. Forster, The Brothers Grimm, Chekhov. Nonfiction works are in here too. So the passage from the Memoirs of Saint-Simon, the Duc de Saint-Simon, where he remembers the death of Monseigneur, who's the son, I believe is the son of the King Louis XIV, is in here. Hugo van Hofmannsthal's Tale of the Cavalry, D.H. Lawrence's Samson and Delilah, and then The Porcelain Doll, which is a letter from Tolstoy. It's very strange. It's like almost like misogynistic, I think. It's a really weird like dream he either had or imagined about his wife turning into a porcelain doll. But this book of stories is fantastic. It is fascinating. It has just all sorts of genres represented. And if you ever see this, I would just say, pick it up. You won't be disappointed. Another collection of stories, Store of the World, stories by Robert Sheckley. These are science fiction stories. They are strange and interesting. Some of them are dystopian. But many of them are really enjoyable. There are some that are set in outer space. Some are set on a future Earth. One where there's Seventh Victim, where murder has become legal and you basically sign up for it. And you're going to go hunt somebody. You get a target and you go and hunt somebody. And if you succeed, then you have to now be hunted. And if you can, defeat your opponent, your hunter, by killing them, you then can take a second victim. And once you get to 10, or once you get to 7 or 10, you're done. You get some special like medallion type thing. What that means for society is horror. But we also have really, really funny stories. Stories like Shape or Specialist, where you have all sorts of the specialists that can become different things to keep this spaceship moving, and how they're going to do that as they encounter issues across as they're traveling. Shape is really interesting. So there's just a lot of really fun stories in here, or a lot of funny stories, dating from, I think quite a few of them are from the 1950s. So this is a great one. Again, you see it, you enjoy science fiction, or you enjoy sort of like weird, ironic stories, pick this up. Cosmic Horror, William Sloane. So this is The Rim of Mourning, Two Tales of Cosmic Horror by William Sloane. The first of them is this really interesting story where a character is coming and basically sitting with the father of his best friend from college. The best friend has recently died by suicide. And so he's now trying to basically have this conversation with his best friend's father about what happened. And the strange woman who his best friend had married and how they both met her at their college. It's a very, intense book. It does capture the northern Arizona desert, sort of the western New Mexico desert, in precise detail. It's very, very well detailed. And so that one is To Walk the Night. Great work of cosmic horror. The second work is The Edge of Running Water, which I'll be reading possibly later this month, and I'll definitely link that in as well. But I really liked To Walk the Night. I thought it was incredibly effective. It's sort of in parts a retelling of Hans Christian Andersen's The Little Mermaid, with a few twists in it. And then we have a beloved work to many, Stoner from John Williams. I think this is a very good book. I know people absolutely love this book. I appreciated reading it. It was one of the very first NYRB Classics I ever read, and it sort of got me discovering that there was this publishing line. So I'm probably as grateful to the book for that as for anything that's in the contents. I'll be honest, my single favorite portion of this book is the graduate oral examination, where Professor Stoner sort of just goes right for the jugular and asks all sorts of questions about grammar, medieval, like grammarians, medieval English literature up through Renaissance English literature, and sort of to expose that a candidate really doesn't know what he's talking about. That chapter is absolute dynamite. This is a sad book. Stoner, I think people interpret Stoner more as more of an everyman than he actually is. There's a sense of there's a very passive sense to his character throughout much of the book. That I think part of why I enjoyed that oral examination chapter so much was because that was one of the few times where he wasn't passive, where he made a push. And so I really enjoyed that portion. But this, again, if you haven't read it, certainly give it a shot. It's an incredibly well-written book. All right. Fat City by Leonard Gardner. Maybe the single greatest boxing novel that's ever been written, and I don't say that lightly. This book is a real gem. Thankfully, NYRB Classics sort of rediscovered it after the Vintage Contemporaries line had published an edition, I want to say in like the 1980s. So this book has been able to get through a couple of sort of those hipstery, if you know, publishing lines, which I think just supports the fact that this is one of the greatest boxing novels ever written. There was a film adaptation directed by John Huston with Stacy Keach as the aging boxer. What's his name? Tully, I want to say. Billy Tully, and then the novice boxer Ernie Munger, who's played by young Jeff Bridges. And Tully's that guy who's always just like one match away from success, but he's down on his luck. He struggles with alcoholism, and Munger is sort of gradually drawn into this world of journeyman boxers, guys who are fighting sort of for the thrill of it, such that can be. Not because there's a lot of glory, not because they're actually winning titles. It's a very sad book. At times there are like these Steinbeck type chapters because it's set around Stockton, California. So at times they'll go work with like migrant farm workers or day laborers. At times they have no money. They haven't had any matches, so there's no money, and they go and experience what it's like to live with the homeless for a week. And so this is it's a sad book, but it captures a slice of life in indelible detail. If you're a fan of Dennis Johnson, I would say this is one to pick up. He wrote the introduction. Okay. If you've read Dennis Johnson's Angels, this, I want to say, was a huge influence on it. Tree of Smoke and Jesus' Son as well. One of the great noir books, In a Lonely Place from Dorothy B. Hughes. I read this with my wife last year. Absolutely loved it. This is like feminist noir. It's a book that inverts all of those sort of dark, troubled detective or cop, stories from the 1940s, 1950s, and really examines just the very brutal and dehumanizing nature that can exist, particularly in men who are going to commit violence towards women. And here we have some women who are smarter than criminals, and who can think their way through situations. And it's a gripping novel, but it's a triumphant novel in a lot of ways. I really enjoyed it. This was also adapted into a film that's totally different work. Very interesting, well acted, with Humphrey Bogart in the key role. I believe it was Nick Ray who directed it. But the book is a real masterpiece. And finally, Storm from George R. Stewart, another unconventional book, published in 1940 or 1941, so just before the U.S. entered World War II. Here, the main character of the book is a storm. So we follow it. Each chapter is a day. And so within the day, we have a couple of characters we check in with, and their lives are all going to be affected or are affected by this storm that gradually becomes a hurricane that sweeps across California and sort of the western U.S. And so we have the junior meteorologist, we have the retired general who's in charge of the floodgates and the flood control there in Sacramento and sort of those river valleys there. We have reports from sailors. We have the people who are in charge of keeping the highway clear there across the Rocky Mountains. Or the Sierra Nevada. We have like electrical workers whose job it will be, or telephone workers whose job will be to go like fix lines. We have a plane that's going to fly into the storm. So we have all of these things going on, and we sort of just are checking in with them. Now, it didn't entirely work for me, in part because it felt like everything was just sort of like faded. The characters were a little too cardboardy at times, with the exception of maybe the junior meteorologist and a couple of the characters who were working like on the highway or the electrical lines. Like we got to know them a little bit better. But for the most part, it was the check-ins didn't quite work for me. But as sort of an early eco novel, as an unconventional novel, it's one that, you know, I want to put out there for people who think they would enjoy it. I've lent it to a student who absolutely loved this book. It's one of now her favorite books. So if you've read Storm, I'd be curious to know what you thought of it, as with any of these. So these were NYRB Classics Fiction. Let me know which ones you've read, and there will be more to come. Thanks.